Well, welcome to the Menlo Midweek podcast, everybody. My name is Mark.
My name is Jessica.
And we have the one and only singing pastor in the flesh, Adam Hendrix.
Hey, everyone. This is a number that I wrote many years ago. It's called Father Abraham. Is everybody ready for the singing pastor?
That was so good.
It was really funny because I put that in the chat online. And I don't know if a lot of people got my joke, but there are a few that were like, nice.
What'd you say?
I said, well, the singing pastor's back.
Oh,
I didn't even think about
different
that,
kind of
that's
singing
not
pastor
exactly
normally, yeah.
a song I
You trying to rebrand?
consider a real song.
yeah.
Yes,
If you don't know what
always.
we're talking about, make sure you go to YouTube
Yes.
and watch. I guess you could listen too, but the motions that Adam does in this is pretty funny. But
Yeah.
we all,
Father Abraham.
I liked that people like kind of sang along because I was like, yep,
Yeah, well, and
absolutely.
Lori, my wife and I were debating like the night before. I was like, remind me about this song. I'm going to do this little bit in the sermon. And I thought you stuck your tongue out too. And she's like, you're thinking of a tootie-ta. And I was like,
Oh my gosh.
have you ever
A
heard of that?
tootie-ta, a
A
tootie-ta.
tootie-ta. And you stick your tongue out. I was like, I don't know. I feel like we did that with Father Abraham. Anyways, not
Right
neither here nor
arm,
there, but
left arm, right foot, left foot, nod your head, turn around and sit down.
yeah, I think that's it.
Right?
That's like the Orthodox
Yeah.
way of doing Father
That's the
Abraham.
biblical
I
way.
can't tell right now if I missed out on a fun childhood experience or if I was. If,
Oh, so
I'm
you actually
glad
don't
I
even know
wasn't
what
there.
we're talking
No,
about.
I don't. Can you fill me in on the joke?
Well, do you know Father Abraham? Did you get that song?
I mean, he's not my dad, but like,
Thanks.
That was the joke that
my
he had,
joke.
too.
cool.
Did you guys do that in the Methodist Church? Father Abraham had many
I
songs?
should remember this, especially because my mom was my children's minister.
You would
but
remember
probably
that
not.
song. It's very,
I don't think we did.
Wow, okay.
think we
Well,
did.
yeah, that's sort of a default Sunday school song
Yeah.
that I had to throw in there. A tootie-ta, which I feel
Don't know what that
very
one is.
pastoral saying that phrase. That's a totally different kid's song.
Okay.
I didn't know
not a
that one
church
as a
song.
kid, but I was a day camp counselor
There you
for a summer camp at a
Mm-hmm.
church, and they did that song, and I was like, what?
Yep, yep. So I'm sure our listeners have really enjoyed this starting banter.
Another one they did at the day
songs.
camp that I didn't know was I forget how the full thing goes, but that it's like, it's like you take out
it the fruit song?
Jesus out of the box and you kiss him. And then the
No.
second
No,
part
that's not a
is
thing.
you
Is that a
take
thing?
Satan out and you smash his face.
No.
And-
Way.
Oh, that
I
feels
kid you not.
like
I kid you not.
I think you went to a cult, actually, because that's not a thing.
Is that what Sacred Summers is all about? Is you just going back to singing childhood songs and redeeming them?
Oh, that would
Nope,
be actually
nope,
really
nope.
fun.
No, yeah, there's something there.
So we're in this series called The Rest of the Story.
Nice.
We're
Get
talking
us out of here.
about
What a pro transition, right?
childhood things,
Yeah.
stories,
That's a good transition.
themes, metaphors that we're like, oh, how sweet that there was a big boat that all the animals went on. But what about the global flood? Or how did all the animals get on there? Or your final question, what happened to all the poopy?
I for sure have thought about that.
Thanks for putting that on Instagram too. I saw that
You're welcome.
last night. I
welcome.
really appreciate it.
It was really funny because I was trying to decide between like 3 or 4 like actual meaty, like, oh, that's a cool way to approach, you know, thinking about this question or this. And I was like, no, I got to do the poopy one.
Well, it's funny because after the service,
Yeah.
I talked to a couple of people. They're in our legacy service, and they had a class. And she was like, she's a sweet older lady, and she was just like, we just couldn't stop talking about how bad it would have stunk on there. I've never thought about that.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm like, I've always thought about
Yeah.
that piece. Like,
Yeah.
that's a full-time job, pooper scooper.
If you're going to
On
let
the
go, nice.
It was like you had your chores, and he had what, 2 sons? I don't remember. And that was like rock paper scissors, or like you were mean to your brother today, so you're the pooper scooper today.
For 24/7, like nonstop.
And if I was to like Lectio Divina myself into the ark, as there's a storm with a rocking boat, I'm seasick. The animals are for sure seasick.
Yeah.
That's just not a place that feels like a fun Sunday school song.
I just would like to say I appreciate that you made Lectio Divina into a Harry Potter spell.
Oh, I like to. Yeah, it was like a verb. If I Lectio Divina my way in there. Yeah. Oh my god.
Which is kind of what you're doing.
This is a great podcast.
Yeah.
I love it.
is.
Did you grow up with the flannel graph? I don't remember if we talked about this
just
yet.
missed the flannel graph, but I was
Okay.
still in puppets.
Okay.
There were definitely
Oh,
finger
yeah.
puppets
Yeah.
and like a chest full of things,
Oh,
but it wasn't
gosh.
like point to something on
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
a board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I just narrowly escaped that. What was your experience like in like what are some fond or not fond, just like memorable memories about childhood ministry?
Yeah.
I got in trouble once because we sang this song, not Father Abraham, that ended, I stand alone on the word of God, the Bible.
Yes.
And
well.
the Bible is what you're spelling. So I put my Bible on the ground and I stood on it. Because that is what the
Literal.
song
That's such
says
a
to
literal
do,
translation.
right? I'm such a literal person
But I'm
sometimes.
doing the best.
And I got in trouble for standing by my Bible, and I was like, it says, stand alone on the word of God.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, I actually have fond memories. I sort of
Yeah.
know, made fun of it a little bit in the sermon, but it was exactly I described. There's a little every room, Sunday school room had a what do you call it, like an upright piano, and there'd be a teacher that'd sort of play something on the upright piano, and then there was a literal flannel graph, and she would teach us on that, and there'd be snack time. I really enjoyed it, and then the puppets came later, and the puppets creeped me out quite a bit. I was never a big fan of the puppets. Don't bring those out, please.
So if you want to send Adam some puppets,
Gosh,
please.
Were you still at Mountain View when we had puppets still?
that was as I came in.
Yeah,
we
that
were
was
getting
like
rid of 'em, yeah.
my first summer being full time. So it was like 2014 or something is when we got rid of puppets at the Mountain View campus.
Yeah, not too long ago.
I don't remember a ton about specific like children's ministry. I remember what the classroom looked like, but the things I remember most were like our big events. Like we had a big maze, a cardboard maze every year for Halloween. We had a giant pumpkin in which we would invite all the neighborhood to come, like all the people to come and like do this maze and this or that. And then we'd
Was it
sit-
like the Hell House or whatever it's called?
It wasn't quite that. Which
you guys have those in
Adam
Oklahoma?
was a part of at some point.
Yep, I've talked about that on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
This was you made a bracelet that had the different colors that represented the
Yeah.
story.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember that.
And then you'd walk out with the bracelet. That was always really fun. But like
Yeah.
the specific Sunday morning things, I don't remember too much. Sorry, Mom.
We actually have your mom on the phone right now, too.
That'd be awesome. But if you are listening or watching this and you want to send in or comment a funny childhood story, we'll read them gladly. And that will be a fun part of.
Or if you're really bold, post it on Instagram and tag us. I'll do that.
That's great.
Okay.
Love it. Love it.
So, Adam, how did you prepare for this? Was it different than preparing from other messages? Obviously, we're talking about something that is like lighthearted and fun, because we can say on one part of it is, man, like look at how absurd these stories are. But then on the other hand, there's a good population that say these stories aren't absurd at all. This is actually how it happened. So, how did you approach that, and what was that like?
Yeah, I actually was talking to Phil yesterday, sort of debriefing, and we were just talking about how these are very uniquely hard to prep, because normally, at least my style with the sermon is to have basically one idea from the text and really break down that one idea, and hopefully, at least again, sort of my bent as a teacher is to really connect with the heart and sort of help us leave with some kind of inspiration that connects to us in our practical life. And so I still wanted to have that, and I sort of had that at the end of like, okay, here's something you can take with you in Silicon Valley today and apply it. But then this piece also has this lecture, not really scientific, but academic type.
Sure.
Because you want to explain, like that's part of the point of this series is we're trying to go deeper. We're trying to grow up and sort of look at this as adults. So you have to have that piece that's a little more academic, which that's a lot in a 25-minute to 30-minute sermon. So that was just different in the prep for sure. I did a lot more background research, study, academic, like that could have been. I thought of this actually yesterday. Is like this could be a 3 or 4 week series about Noah and the flood, and try to pack it in 25 minutes. It was really tough. I cut out most stuff.
Yeah.
Is there something in there that you were looking back, you're like, I should have included that? I mean, it sounds like you had a lot of extra stuff, but
Yeah, there's just so much. I would have loved to talk more about the different flood narratives and what does that mean for the story. Because I was talking with a friend of the podcast, Josh Horton, Chelsea Josh, my roommate, yesterday.
Josh.
And he made a great point of like,
Your roommate.
roommate
Office
at
mate.
Menlo Church. He made a great point of like, there's probably a big subset of Christians, even in our church, that don't even know about these other flood narratives. So that alone could have been like a 10, 15-minute segment of like breaking some of those down. I would have loved to break down the connection to Jesus even more. Like I did a little bit, but that was sort of a newer thing for me in my study the past few weeks of like, wow, this is such a cool connection point to Jesus. So again, that could have been like the whole sermon could have been focused more on that.
Right.
There's just a lot.
I actually, in the last 6 months, learned about the different floods.
Okay,
and the different
totally.
through this podcast that we've talked about before, and the whole bow in the clouds thing. That was a new thing I learned about too, and it was like, man, there's so much more to the story.
Yep.
Hence the whole series.
Yeah,
It's just been really cool.
Yeah. It's really cool. And I think, my hope, I talked to tons of people afterwards. This has been probably for me the most conversation after sermon I've had at Menlo before. Just a lot of people interested, questions, excited. And my hope for everybody, because you just can't dig in too much in a 30-minute sermon, is it really does spur us all to go back to these stories. Obviously, that's the point of the series. It's like we want to go back to these and sort of dig in deeper, sort of get underneath of like what do we see about God and us in these stories. They're so rich. They're so good.
And one of the things that I appreciate most about you as a person, not just as a speaker, is how you're willing to talk things out and you're willing to not hold things super tightly. So as people are engaging in these conversations, what advice do you have to, to kind of separate like, man, I believe this thing about this story forever, and now I'm being questioned. And that can feel threatening. It can feel like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Am I wrong? So if people are engaging in that kind of thought, what advice, what encouragement would you give them?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think we can't ignore what's happening internally, like in our minds or our hearts. And so that would be a piece of it, is like sometimes because something might feel a little scary or uncomfortable, our tendency would be like, but that might rock the boat of my beliefs or my thoughts. It's like, well, it's going to be in there. And at some point that's going to keep nagging on you. So I'm definitely a believer in Jesus as truth. And as we dig in deeper and ask questions, we're just going to uncover more truth. So we can't be scared of asking questions, having hard conversations. And then I talked to someone afterwards, and but in the midst of that, just remembering that the point of all this for Christians is Jesus. And so we have to hold firm to what we believe about Jesus and how we follow him, and then ask these questions in light of that. Like, you're sort of partnering with Jesus. You're not sort of, I think I know you guys talked about this last week. I love listening to you guys talk a little bit about deconstruction. Like, that's such a popular word in Christian culture right now. And it's like, don't worry about like deconstructing anything. Instead, sort of look at it as like, as I journey with Jesus, I want to dig into the scriptures more, and I want to understand and ask questions. And so it's just a little different approach, I think. I don't think I actually answered the question, but there's something.
I know for me, and I don't remember if I shared this last week or not, but my like deconstruction journey has been like, so one of the biggest things that I've like learned is the God in the New, I've known the God in the Old Testament, everybody says the God in the Old Testament is the same God in the New Testament is the same God now. That's fact. We all know that. But then you read these stories about this flood and all the rest of the, like, we're going to talk about the Tower of Babel this weekend and sin and Abraham and Isaac and all these things. And you're like, how is that God the same God And one of the things I've learned in my journey has been how it's more about God's grace. Time and time again in the Old Testament, like, yes, he does these things or he doesn't do these things, but he's time and time again, he's giving his people second chances and just constantly saying, like, I still love you. You're my people. I'm going to help you. I'm going to take you here. And it's just been like, you know, in my heart of hearts, I've known that this is a good God, but yet how do you reconcile all these horrible things? Yeah. But that's been something that's been really cool for me, is actually to see it in a different way of like, we get so focused on the wrath of God that we don't see of like the why and the deep and the love and all of that kind of stuff. So I encourage people to like, just dig into it, but focus on Jesus, focus on the more important part of it, not like, I was always taught these things and now they're actually false, or maybe they are false or whatever. But when you focus on Jesus and the point of everything, then you can hopefully reconcile all of that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think for me, being good or becoming better at studying the Bible is becoming good at zooming in and then zooming out and sort of going in and out constantly. Because you got to zoom in, go to the context of what was happening. You want to zoom in and really get like, okay, what are the words here? What was happening in the ancient Near East? And that's good. And then you got to constantly zoom out too. And I talked about that in the sermon. Like, this is an ongoing narrative that is taking place. So for us as Christians, this is a narrative of redemption that's very long. And so if you get too zoomed in and you just focus on one story, you sort of miss like, what is God doing in the long term? And so, there's that constant back and forth. And I think too, like, it's important to remember these are ancient stories. And I think, if I could go back and sort of talk to younger me a little more, is just to understand like part of the violence, part of the stories that are in there are coming out of a time of life that are so vastly different than ours. And so we see things and we're like, that is crazy. And that is,
whoa.
Speaking of crazy, that light is...
Pause.
If you're not watching us on YouTube, one of our lights is flickering. And do you think it's God trying to tell us something?
All right.
We're back.
Well, that's fun.
Oh, yeah, we're back. But yeah, just, that is a time of life that they dealt with things differently. They viewed things differently. Violence, tribalism, all that kind of stuff. It was a different world. And so sometimes we read those stories and it's shocking and it's crazy. And it's like, well, that was part of just the world as it was back then.
My friend was talking about that recently. I forget what story in the Bible it was, but it was like, if my kids die, if your kids die, you can have mine, or something like that. And she's a mom and she's like, what? Like, if my kids die, I don't want someone else's, or I don't want to, like, oh, yours died, you can have mine. And she's like, it's just it was such a different time that was like, was life not as like fragile back then? Was like your family and your kids not as like important, in a way of like, you just trade them and pass them around. And if they die, it's like, oh, well, we'll have more. It's like, what? So totally to your point of it was such a different time.
Different time, different life, yeah.
I also think it's interesting that despite this story being one of the first stories we hear in the Bible, Jesus isn't coming until much, much later. But still trying to read it through the lens of how does this connect to Jesus and that story? Can you connect those dots for us for how we approach Old Testament things and how that relates to a person that came a lot of years later? And why is it important to make that connection to Jesus and not just, well, there's a God there, there's a God here. And so where does Jesus fit into this story?
Well, I do think the first step is always to take the story as is. And so it is important to remember on the first read or the first sort of interpretation, first way you look at it is to remember that this is a ancient Jewish story, because these are, this is part of the Jewish Bible, right? Like this is, so sort of look at it through the lens of what does this mean for Israel? What did this mean in Israel's history and all of that? So that's important. Like you sort of separate that and sort of look at the context. And then, but for us as Christians, we believe that everything that Jesus, as he lived life, like he affirms everything in the Old Testament. He affirms everything. And so you see constantly in the Old Testament this concept of Messiah. Israelites were always waiting, looking forward to this Messiah that would come. And even the Noah story is like a version of that. Like Noah was sort of seen at the beginning of the story, like he's going to be this Messiah, this Savior in this narrative, but he is not. Like he's just human, and so this is pointing to an eventual Messiah. So for us, it's like we can weave all of these stories. We can look back. What is this saying about the Messiah? Where do we see Jesus in the midst of that? And sometimes, again, it's important to do that first step first, like sort of look at the text as is, and then for us, it's like, that's what we are as Christians. This is our lens that we view things through. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And then I think the last thing that I want to drill down on is a question that was kind of central to your whole message, which was, is it true?
Okay, yeah.
And so as we are coaching and teaching ourselves how to approach stories, how to approach narratives, how to approach things that aren't necessarily just in, this Bible as well. You mentioned some other teachings from, I think, like a Jewish community as well, which I thought was pretty interesting too, of just like how they approached it. And so when we're asking this question, is it true? What are we really asking? And you kind of, you hinted at this and did a good job of unpacking that in your message, but I just want to give a little bit of more space to that now.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the best way to, I think for me, the quote that I mentioned from like the head of theology.
Suck up.
And Thank you for
This is
that.
my one shot.
See a listener?
Sure he is. But I thought he said it like super concise and super well of like, you're misunderstanding the point if you're asking, did this exactly happen as is?
Totally.
Because there's a deeper truth that these narratives are trying to point to. And I think it's important on the practical side. And I loved how Phil set it up the first week, and I tried to follow on this. Like, these are what are considered non-essential parts of our faith. There are going to be Christians that take these stories as literally true to the very, detail. And that's okay. That's good. And then there are going to be Christians who view this more as like figurative, a little more of a narrative that is pointing to something different. And that's okay. Like sometimes we can easily become a little polarized in that way too, of like, okay, well, I can't believe you take that literal, you're ignorant, or I can't believe you take that figurative, you're not like a real Christian. And these are like non-essential parts. Like I was talking, again, I talked to a lot of people afterwards, and we talked about the creeds. Like, we don't talk about the creeds in our church a ton, but the creeds were a way for the early church to remember, here are the essentials of what it means to be a Christian and a follower of Jesus. And nowhere in the creeds does it say like, and also we got to remember that we take these, that was just not the essential part. So I think it's just important to sort of see, like, have some varying degrees there. And we mentioned these two different books in the past 2 weeks give different views that Christians have. So there's definitely ways to sort of dig into, like, what do you actually believe in that spectrum? But again, for truth-wise, it's like, I actually believe all these stories are true. I would just say that the truth is a deeper, more, it's like a deeper understanding of what is true.
Yeah, that's great.
I think that's like, just put a little bow on that. That's like the series right there. I feel like that's, especially in this area, I think people get so caught up in black and white and what is true and what is not true. And especially, like, I was taught that the Bible is totally true. And now look, like, doing my own kind of study and research, I'm like, I don't know, maybe it wasn't, and I'm okay, like, not really knowing what actually happened or didn't happen, because in the end, it's like, that's not what's important, And so I think that's just such a powerful reminder for this whole series of, like, Yeah, definitely do research. Try to figure out what
Yeah.
you believe and what you don't believe. But if you get to a point where you're like, I have no idea,
Yes.
that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. And I think the hope is that this would just drive us more to fall more in love with Jesus and who he is and how he approached the scriptures. And these are, for me, my journey through the Bible in my lifetime. It's so cool because I'm more in love with the scriptures than I've ever been in my life. And these stories are so alive and so true to me. And just because there are different views on how it happens does not like shake my faith anymore. It's actually sort of made my faith more vibrant. And so that would be my prayer and hope for everyone, is that the journey would just make things more rich and more full in the Bible.
You did touch on a little bit the rainbow or the
Yeah.
bow in the cloud. Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So rainbow is what that's the phrase that we typically use. Hebrews didn't have a word for rainbow, but it was bow in the clouds, which of course it was a rainbow, right? But it's just cool to sort of break down that phrase and think of what is a bow. Because I don't know about you guys, when I think of a rainbow, I've never thought about the shape of it.
Yeah.
It's just in
Pretty
my head,
colors.
right? So,
Yeah. Exactly.
In our lexicon, don't really think about it. So to think of a bow in the clouds just helps us think of what is a bow. A bow is something that sort of arcs and then points to. And so to think of it as God made this covenant and this sign, it was like it's pointing to God himself. This is who God is. This is a covenant that I'm making with humans forever, that you can always remember to look at this bow in the clouds that would point to
My
me.
gosh.
Like just the last piece on the bow is just thinking about what that meant, again, through the lens of Jesus and like the cross, and how it's just cool to think of the inverse of Noah, of how humankind lost in the flood, but one man and his family was saved, and then the flip of that, where humankind was saved and Jesus was the one who took on the violence and the suffering, and just how the cross is sort of a bow in the clouds, right? It sort of points to God. And then my final thought, and this is how the story has really resonated with me more recently, is just thinking through how does God point to himself and the covenant in this world, and that is us. And that's a pretty cool responsibility of like, we are the bow in the clouds. The way we live life is how we point to this God of restoration and redemption. It's pretty cool.
Sweet. Well, what else do you have going on this summer? I know that you're kind of taking some time off, but I think Sank's doing something special as well. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. At the first of every month, Sank, we're doing our worship service.
First Sunday every month.
First Sunday of every month.
Right,
That's
okay.
correct. We're calling it Sacred Sank, and we had our first one last month, and this upcoming Sunday is our second one. And Sacred, just essentially, we're just trying something where we're having like a contemplative service. Candles, no amplification, no screens at all. There's even a table where we encourage, you don't have to, but we encourage people to just leave their phones for an hour and just sort of take that away. And it was really cool. The first one we did, I personally believe there's a hunger among our generation and lower. We're very aware of what technology is doing to us, and we sort of feel it, we sense it. And so to provide spaces where we can just get away from that a little bit and connect with God in a little more of a quiet, silent type of a way. So, yeah, that's the first Sunday of every month. And, and then we'll be back. We do a weekly Bible study that will be back in August, and I'm stoked for that.
That'd be so great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Be good.
Well, thanks for stopping by, Adam. We might have a midweek next week or maybe not, but after that, we're planning on doing something pretty cool. Jess,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we just thought it would be fun to do something a little different this summer. Phil is off most of the summer writing, so he's still going to be preaching for us, but not really working in the office. So we were like, okay, well, we don't really have Menlo midweek. So we met with Adam and a couple other listeners of the show to come up with some fun ideas. So we're going to have some kind of like a variety show kind of thing. We're just going to talk about weird, funny stuff, and it's going to be really fun. So
I love that description. Weird, funny stuff.
Weird
it's gonna
and
be
funny.
a mix of like theology, midweek kind of stuff, but also like, man, let's dig in. Let's have two people talk about opposing sides of Noah's Ark and stuff like that.
yeah.
Or everything in between. Or just like give Adam 5 minutes with the microphone and let him talk.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
So it's experiment, something to have fun. Our hope is that you can just put this on as you're traveling or in the airport, and it's it's a good mix of entertainment and is also some fun things underneath it. So
Cool.
it'll be really fun. That should be coming out in a couple weeks. And if you again have any funny childhood stories,
Yes.
let us know. Text us at 650-600-0402. Have a great weekend, everybody. Great week. See you soon.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.